14 years. How many I've counseled? At Tamarack, we used to get about 75 a year. Then plus Finding Freedom, so it's well over 1,000. Nothing. That's part of the weird thing is I had never had a thought about counseling in addictions. And then two things happened. I was off disability and I was working on a farm, and the son of the farm owner just had admitted he was a crack addict, and he came and talked to me a lot while we were working. And then a lady that worked at Tamarack approached me and says, I think you'd be a perfect fit for Tamarack. And I said, I really don't think that's where I should be. I'm not that interested in it. She said, well, at least come and give it a try. And so that's how I ended up there. I loved it. I think about that, like as far as overdose and suicide. I was thinking a couple of weeks ago, I wish I had written down all the people that I've worked with that have died. I would say it's probably at this point 30 to 50. It's an involved question. When I started at Tamarack, the lady that trained me had been there for 25 years. And Tamarack was the only place that really looked at underlying issues of all the treatment centers in Manitoba. And so she, my first day, said, Tim, we teach that addiction's not the problem, it's the symptom of the real problem. And so until people find out their underlying problems and fix those, they'll never really have a very good solution to addiction. So she kind of put it in the terms of complex trauma that we used, and that term wasn't in use at that time. It wasn't even, people weren't aware of it. And then a couple years after I was at Tamarack, so I'd been working and they kind of gave me permission to pursue some of those underlying issues. So they got me to develop the 12 Needs workshop. They got me to develop a shame workshop and stuff like that. And so I was doing lots of thinking about that, and then counseling people and realizing that those were the main issues. And then there came out a term called developmental trauma disorder, DTD. And that was the first that really began to look at kind of the trauma of childhood. And then that kind of morphed into complex trauma. So then what happened when DTD came out, then places like AFM started bringing in speakers on child trauma and the effects of trauma. And so more and more people were realizing there's a lot of trauma things. And so that then led to lots more research being done, and then what does it take to heal from trauma? And it was, they need to be in a pseudo family or a surrogate family. And I think first of all, they have to feel that they're not judged, that they're accepted for who they are. They have to have a safe place where they can feel loved, accepted, that they can open up, that they can talk about their crap without something bad happening. They need some positive role models in their life. They need lots of teaching around their tools, but also their old patterns, so they can begin to identify and stop them. So there's a certain amount where they have to have a certain external environment that's safe, that is healthy, positive, where they can talk openly, but then they have to begin to work on themselves internally. And so we can only guide them in that. They got to do the hard work. So we can provide as best we can an external environment, and we can coach them on the internal and support them, but they have to reach a point where they make a lot of hard decisions. Well, with the complex trauma, we teach the 4 different causes of it. So the abuse, the neglect, the abandonment, and then what we've really, where I've developed, is that the most subtle form is the 12 needs not being consistently met or some of the 12 needs not being consistently met. And so that everybody has that. They didn't have their needs met well, physical, emotional, relational, spiritual. But then we teach the 50 characteristics that come out of that. And so most all of the addicts have that. But the most common characteristic for most is the shame part, and then the anger and anxiety, fear emotions that are big. And then because of those, then that leads into the wearing masks, taking roles, being control freaks, manipulating, all of those different relational coping skills that they have. And so I think we've been able to present a fairly clear picture of the characteristics that a complex trauma child would have that a healthy child wouldn't have, so that people can begin to understand their issues. And I'd seen that 2 months of treatment just wasn't enough. And so as more and more research was done, it was just in my mind, nobody's in a place to truly help people with complex trauma, because AFM can't give you a 10-year program or a 2-year program. Just too expensive. So that's when I started about 4 years ago, thinking about, 5 years ago, thinking about what would it look like if we were to provide something that really helped people to deal with complex trauma. And then it just kind of developed since then. Complex trauma goes way beyond addiction. So addiction is kind of the most devastating symptom, but most of the people in jail have complex trauma, and there's been studies that show that. And then a lot of people on the welfare system have complex trauma. And so to me, if you look at all the social service things in our city, most of the people involved in the social service system have complex trauma. So I just think we're just starting to the tip of the iceberg when it comes to really helping as many people out there that need it. We're just helping the addict part right now, but there's so much more that it could grow and develop into lots of different things.